Greetings YouTube and welcome to the Blue Corner. In this video I have for you guys a Cardfight Vanguard deck profile. It is going to be on Oracle Think Tank for the G era. I finally got a Stride deck finished and it's been a lot of fun to play. I will not deny that it's a bit on the cheesy side because I am running Silent Tom and he's kind of a douche, but for the time being it's something that I can play that's competitive and then I can easily get rid of when the next set drops. I know, I've pretty much got a deal worked out for this deck anyway. So, let's get started. Oracle Think Tank, for those that don't know, are based around the idea of just having a high amount of hand advantage over other decks. You run a lot of cards that you either straight up draw, or you can look at the top cards of your deck, add to your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your deck. Always get that mixed up. Words are tough, as Team Vanguard would say. But anywho, what this deck does is it takes advantage of Stride's triple drive in addition to your much more improved draw capabilities to keep a big hand against the other main decks of the format, which is probably one of the few reasons why this deck is actually really good. And you get the stack triggers on Silent Tom, who's become a lot stronger now with the addition of more 8K grade 1s, thus allowing you to make those 16K columns with him. So that being said, let's get on to this deck. So my starting Vanguard is a little bit Lulu because I am playing the Coco build. There's also a Susanoo build of this deck and a Battle Sister build of this deck, but I don't like the Susanoo ride chain, and I find that Battle Sister, well, I just can't pick up Battle Sister cards. There are a lot of them, and some of them are just difficult to pick up. So this is the much more cheaper variation of OTTs, barring Toms, but Lulu's effects are actually pretty unique for a Forerunner in that she doesn't immediately call herself to rear guard when you ride a grade 1 over her. She instead stays in the soul, which is good and bad. It's good in the sense that she can't be picked off by things that terrorize your rear guards like Blaster Dark, Revenger Abyss, and Gatling Claw Dragon, but on the other hand, she stays in soul, meaning your grade 1 doesn't get a booster, which makes it easier for your opponent to no-hit your attacks. But when you ride your grade 3 though, that's when she comes out, and then she activates her skill of you can basically soul blast 2 cards to draw a card, which is nice. It's a straight up +1/+2 count in this thing, and it combos nicely with Coco's skill to draw 2 cards when you have 1 or less cards in soul on riding her. And it's also a solid 5K booster, so this with a Susanoo behind it, and you're attacking with your G unit means you're swinging for 31, magic number. And with Coco at no soul, it's 18,000. With this and Susanoo at Generation Break 2, that's 21,000. So she just helps make solid numbers. And I've talked about Susanoo a fair bit, so let's just get right down to him. This is your main Vanguard. We're just going to call him Susanoo. His effect is first Generation Break 2, which is available when you have 2 or more units in your G zone that are face up. During your turn, if you have 4 more cards in hand, which is not going to be an issue with this deck, you get 5,000 power and a bonus critical, which is a pretty good pressure skill, as it's 16,000 unboosted, 21 with Coco, and with Lulu, and 20, yeah, whatever. It's math is also difficult for me. Yeah, it's still a pretty powerful skill in that your opponent has to be wary of taking these hits, as you're playing 12 crits in this deck, so if they're at 3 damage and this thing goes at your opponent and you flip a crit, they die. And it just eats more shielding from them. And then his other skill is when your G unit strides on top of this card, you kind of ask 1 to look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You add 1 of those cards to your hand to put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order, also known as reverse stacking, and it combos nicely with your other G skills. So then for the backup grade 3, I'm running 4 copies of Scarlet Witch Coco. Very old card, but still pretty good in that when you ride her and the number of cards you have in your soul is 1 or less, so obviously after your Lulu skill resolves, you can counterblast 2 to draw 2 cards, so it's a nice +3 with Lulu. And during your turn, if you have no cards in soul, she's +3,000, but to be perfectly honest, you really aren't going to be using Coco by herself. You're just going to be striding on top of her. It does kind of suck that her ability makes her G units only at 25,000, meaning it's a lot easier for your opponent to guard, but that's fine. You'll be putting trigs on Tom in your rear guards anyway, so it's of no real consequence that you're running a 10K base. Then for the grade 2s, let's just talk about the guy that makes people hate this deck, Silent Tom. So when this guy attacks, your opponent can't guard with zeros. meaning they have to perfect guard this thing. Most of the time, it's like, yeah, whatever, he's 8,000, but once you start stacking crits on this guy, then it becomes a problem, because then they can't slap down their grade 0s, they have to PG this thing, or they die. And now that the deck has more grade 1s that are 8k, it's a lot easier to make 16,000 columns with Tom, so that even if your opponent hits a defensive trigger and they're sitting at 16, you can still hit them with this guy. And yeah, the basic idea behind this deck is get to the point where you're able to hit a bunch of trigs, stack them on Tom, and then kill them. Like, that's your kill play. Then for the other grade 2s, 3 copies of, oh boy, what's this one say? Koroi Kazuchi. There we go. He's the Amber clone for the deck, so Generation Break 1, when this unit attacks the Vanguard and it's boosted, counterblast 1 to do X thing. In this case, it's just a free draw. So, nice +1. And I'm running 2 copies of Oracle Agent Royce. This is a grade 3 searcher. When you hit the Vanguard, you can have +1 to look at the top 5 and add a grade 3, which is pretty good stability for the deck. And finally, 2 copies of Promised Daughter. When this unit attacks, you can discard a card from your hand to have her gain 5,000. The neg 1 does seem bad at first, but it means that you can push for even more damage during the late game when your opponent's burning their resources trying to block your stuff. And this with a 7 behind it means she's 16 base, so if you use her skill, she becomes 21, which requires a 15 in order to completely no-hit. Yeah, in order to make it no-hit. So if you put triggers on her, then that's 20 shield and whatnot. So she just helps you make magic numbers for your big kill push in case they kill off your Toms. For the grade 1s, I'm running 4 copies of the Unflipping Perfect Guard. This deck doesn't run any ways of flipping up damage since I don't have the soul for Battle Sister Lemonade, so I have to run this guy. 3 copies of the Stride Enabler, searches out Susanoo when you call it as well. And finally, for the grade 1s, 7 8k vanillas to help make magic numbers with Tom and to help Coco swing for 21 during the turn where you have to have her as Vanguard. And for the triggers, it's pretty simple. 4 heal triggers featuring Lozenge Magus, and then 12 crits. 4 Psychic Birds are included among them for the ability to put itself into the soul to draw a card, which may be needed. Then for the extra deck, yes, I'm calling it that. It's just not going to change. I'm too used to that. Anyway, for the extra deck, I'm running 4 copies of Takame Kazuchi. This is the G Persona and Flipper, so you turn a copy of itself face up to use its skill, and you have to have 2 or more face-up units in your G zone to use the skill. But in order to be at that point, you have to have used a card already, so this will be your second Stride play. Your first one is actually Karen, but I'm going with this guy first because he is the really shiny card. His effect is Counterblast 2. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You add 2 to your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. It's a straight up +2, and if you throw this guy on top of Susanoo, then it's a +3. It's actually pretty good. 2 copies of Kirin. This is your on-hit G unit, so when your attack hits the Vanguard, look at the top 2 cards, add 1, and reverse stack the other one. 1 copy of Miracle Element Atmos. This is a generic Stride unit that every deck can use, and his effect is when you attack, you can count us 1 to give him 10k. Given that your opponent is probably going to be committing 0 shields in order to block your Vanguard attacks and PGing Toms, this is really powerful in the later stage of the game where they don't have PGs in their hand. Therefore, when you attack with this guy, he's probably going to be 41,000, meaning they pretty much have to put everything down in order to block it, which is fine. Then they have nothing to really block your other guys. And then finally, 1 copy of Harmonics Messiah. The 16,000 powers for when I feel like I need to hit a certain number, as it allows you to swing for 26 with Coco, thus 31 with Lulu behind it. Hasn't really come up that often, but I feel like it's still something worth playing over, say, the second copy of Atmos. And that's it for the deck itself. I want to say it's relatively inexpensive, but Silent Tom is not inexpensive. He's pushing 20-25 a piece now because of just how powerful he is. Like, it's because of this deck that this guy has jumped up to the prices that he has. If it wasn't for this guy, you could easily do this thing for under 100 bucks, maybe under 50, just because of how cheap the cards are. The Perfect Guards are $3, the Amber Clone's $1, and Susanoo is like pushing 5. Takame Kazuchi is pushing 10. Like, if it wasn't for Tom, I would consider this to be a budget deck, and a fairly good one, as it's able to hang with the big boys pretty decently. Obviously, lacrosse can be difficult, especially if they start looping and you can't kill them fast enough, then you'll just deck out. But against other decks like, oh, what would be a good one? Shadow Paladins, I'd say you actually stand a good chance of beating Revengers because you'll A, have the hand to stop their burst play, and B, you can just, you just crit them to death. And that's basically the game plan with this deck, is get your opponent to 3 damage and then go for a stride play and hopefully hit crits and kill them with Silent Tom. It's fairly degenerate, but that's kind of what you've got to do with this type of deck. There's nothing really too strategic, it's just what do you put on the bottom of your deck? Do you take the trigger so you can have it as a shield, or do you put the trigger on the bottom of your deck so that you can flip it later and kill someone?